Welcome to View from Brussels. My name is Brandy Miller. Today in the studio, I'm joined by MEP Barry Cowen, who is Renew Europe's lead negotiator on the future of the Common Agriculture Policy. Barry, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. Delighted to do so.
I'd like to turn a bit to agriculture policy, naturally, because that's a topic you're working on, especially in light of the fact that we see so much conversation happening around defense, energy independence, strategic autonomy, but less so about CAP, which is such a huge file. Why should we be looking at food security, particularly now, with the same political attention as something like defense?
I think the bottom line is it's pretty simple, really. We can't if we can't feed ourselves, we can't defend ourselves, and the pressure that's on input costs by virtue of the geopolitical realities that exist today is putting great pressure on the sector and its ability to produce food at the pace at which it needs to keep with a growing population and so forth. So it's essential that any defence and security policy is supplemented and augmented by adequate provisions in relation to agricultural and food production policy as well.
As we see with every 7 years that the Common Agriculture Policy sets the direction for European agriculture, what are we really seeing now in the current round of negotiations for the post 2027 CAP as the negotiations intensify post 2027?
The Commission has set out its stall. It has set aside a provision of 286 billion to accommodate a common agricultural policy and to deal with the agricultural sector post 2027 to 2034. It's inadequate insofar as its 20% reduction of what was there previously. That's notwithstanding the realization and a commitment that there has to be, as you say, to defence and security, but that has to be augmented and supplemented. So it's the onus of responsibility on the Parliament, on the Commission, on the European Council, is to satisfy itself that it is adequately provided for an agricultural spend. The duty that I have as a negotiator, together with my colleagues, and we've formed an alliance that I think will see the centre hold and will see influence by virtue of my grouping Renew together with the EPP and S&D. And I myself have brought forward proposals to close the initial 20% gap that exists by virtue of provision that was made during the course of the Mercosur agreement. As it reached conclusion, there was an extra safeguards and safety nets put in place, one of which was the supplementation of CAP by 45 billion as a mid-term injection. We want to see that front-loaded. We also want to see the rural provision, the rural development provision, brought back into the Common Agricultural Policy envelope, which is a 48 billion figure, and that can immediately close the 20% gap and thereafter look for some increase in relation to inflation in order to be in a position to do what's needed to ensure that agriculture can deal with all those pressures it has presently, because we can't ask the sector or farmers to do more with less. We can't make progress in relation to the transition to sustainable food production systems that align with consumer sentiment, that align with environmental ambition, unless they're adequately resourced to do so.
So on that, do you see that there is a willingness to fund CAP and to, I guess, close this 20% gap that you're speaking of?
There is general agreement between the likes of ourselves, EPP and S&D to bring forward proposal of that nature to immediately close the gap. And, there is potential for other member states within the 27 member states where agriculture might be more, more a part of one economy than another's, that there is potential for other means in which to augment the agriculture spend by virtue of co-financing projects that fund and assist, in addition to conditionality associated with the CAP presently, in relation to innovation, in relation to new technologies, in relation to all those tools that can, as I say, move agriculture towards sustainable food production, carbon emission reductions, but meeting the ambition that we have from an environmental perspective and that consumers buy into.
I want to speak a bit about the realities on the ground for farmers. Could you speak a bit more about some of their concerns and how that's being addressed in negotiations, and also the prospects of what's going to happen for Europe's agriculture?
Yeah, well, look, you see, The conditionality associated with the single farm payment today creates great um, pressures on agricultural producers, on farm families, on farm entities to meet. And you would have seen protests across
Mhm.
Europe some years ago. So there's an expectation that there'll be no further conditionality associated with single farm payments. However, there has to be rewards for those that go beyond the existing conditionality, that follow innovation, that follow new technologies, that follow new farm practices in a way in which ensures continued and augmented and enhanced production systems and new and production of food, but does so sustainably. Allied to that and parallel to that, you have smaller uh, farm entities,
Yes.
small farm families, less productive, maybe less profitable, but supplementary income. And without that income being in place, rural areas would be depopulated if they weren't supported. So this common agricultural policy process and negotiation period will also have to redefine what is active farming. And active farming isn't always the high production, high intensity, high producing, highly profitable producers. Like I said, there are smaller entities that do so in in different ways, and they can be augment their income by virtue of carbon and nature trading,
Mhm.
by virtue of biodiversity, all contributing factors to ensuring our product carries the standards associated with environmental progress that's necessary, but also recognizing that those entities have to be supported too, and maybe further supported, which create further income streams for them, which is not their primary income, but ensures they stay on the land, that the land remains productive, and that those regions that they're in remain populated.
Well, farmers have also mentioned concern and protested here in Brussels, in particular,
Mm,
about Mercosur. So we can't
mm.
talk about agriculture policy without speaking about that. What is Europe doing to protect local farmers and to protect its industry?
Well, look, as a producing entity, whether it's the member state or the European Union as a bloc, food security and food safety is paramount. And you will see in any international trade agreement, we seek and expect reciprocity in relation to standards and food production methods and systems. And you've seen, I personally was fearful of different aspects of the Mercosur trade deal, especially in relation to beef production in some of the Mercosur countries, that we were fearful that they don't do so to the same standards as ourselves, that the usage of antibiotics is
Yes.
quite prolific. But there's a responsibility and an onus on the European Union, on its food safety entities, to ensure that no product is compromised from a food safety or food security perspective. So we see, while I may have expected the reality of the Mercosur trade deal to go through by virtue of majority decision, it was incumbent on me nonetheless to ensure and to fight for proper and more enhanced safeguards and safety nets to ensure that the concerns and fears on the part of me and others and within the sector would be addressed. And by virtue of increased number of checking, increased resources, increased staffing to ensure that that checking took place, to ensure that those farms for which product was coming into Europe are exclusively ones that meet the standards and specifications associated with beef production as they are here. And you've seen in the meantime, for example, um, the, 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 the issue where Brazil and their standards in relation to antibiotic use has been recognised as one that is contravenes our laws and regulations. And thankfully, there will not be in a position to avail of the benefits associated with the Mercosur trade deal until progress is made in that regard. And that proves that the European Union, the European entity, is committed to food safety and food security above all else.
Mhm.
Trade will flow beyond that, and we welcome that and welcome competition and welcome opportunities to break into new areas. I know from my own perspective in relation to our own country, we've increased international trade by 7% year on year, a huge contributor to our resourcing our government and our economy by virtue of the success we've had internationally. And that's as a result of the standards we have grown accustomed to and committed to within the European Union itself.
We've been speaking a lot about food safety and food security, but I also want to speak about food innovation
Yeah.
and Europe becoming more competitive. How can the EU balance standards with creating space for more innovation to grow?
Yeah, well, look, it's not necessarily innovation versus regulation.
Okay, explain a bit.
Yeah, well, we can do both. And you've seen that an example of that in recent weeks in plenary last week in Strasbourg. The Parliament agreed to new genomic techniques
Hmm.
associated with, categorizing their usage, recognizing that different climates deserve different pesticides and so forth, but building up resilience in the context of the geopolitical realities there are, and the supply of goods being impacted, the supply of fertilizers being impacted. And it's important that that was done and space created, and acknowledge the interventions that science can make, but doing so in a balanced way. You also see, in relation to, speaking of fertilizers, the biotech industry is coming up with new solutions that can replace old provisions that was associated with the fertilizer sector, again imported into Europe. One issue that I'd like to see addressed is the time it takes for those products to get to market,
Mm.
and the systems that is in place to ensure that they are meet the food and health and safety guidelines can be done a lot quicker, because the toxicity associated with those products is far from what was there previously.
Would you say that you see Europe on the trajectory to remain competitive in its agriculture across the world and also in negotiating future trade agreements?
Yeah, well, look, it's as the US looks inwards,
Hmm.
as China becomes more assertive, there's an an expectation on the part of me and my colleagues in this mandate for those with charge of responsibility of bringing international trade agreements to the table and agreeing them, that they're done in a much more timely fashion,
Hmm.
and that the legalities and associated with their going to getting into play is done a lot quicker and more timely than was the case previously. And thankfully, we've seen progress in that regard. If you look at recent trade deals, not only Mercosur, but Australia, India, Gulf states, Singapore previously, a lot more timely, a lot more cognizant of our need to be assertive ourselves, but obviously to also align with those who respect and appreciate international law and rule of law, upholding democracy, and ensuring trade has works both ways, and there'll be winners and losers in different sectors. But in the round, we have a responsibility to ensure that we offer new markets, new opportunities beyond our own boundaries.
Are there any perhaps food safety standards that you see the EU exporting to other partners or setting the scene? I mean, I know particularly from the US is kind of my thinking that there are, say, for example, some products from the US that are not permitted in Europe. So I'm just kind of going on that thread.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. I seen it myself. I visited India as that deal neared completion, and talking with my counterparts and with stakeholders there in advance of final agreement. There was a recognition that they maybe in certain areas can't go at the pace at which we would expect and
Mhm.
we have become accustomed to. So there has to be some allowance for that and some time afforded, but review systems in place to ensure that they're moving in the right direction, because we do, as I said earlier, food security, food safety is paramount. We
Yes.
cannot compromise that in any way, shape, or form. But we do recognize that others are not where we are at, and we can help and assist through various means from a societal perspective in relation to education and the sharing of information around innovation and technology. Like I see in my own country, where Teagasc, you know, young professionals at the cutting edge of new technological advancements, only too willing and able to share that information to ensure that we help and reflect the commitment that our electors expect of us.
I do want to, as we kind of wrap it up, I have two more questions, but one of them particularly is focused on the future of Europe's agriculture sector, and namely those farmers, the ones who should be replaced as time goes on. We are starting to see the younger generation perhaps struggle to see a future in this sector, and whereas their families have maybe owned the farms for years or centuries,
Mhm.
now they're starting to see other opportunities and not necessarily wanting to stay in the same sector. Are you optimistic about the future of farmers in Europe? And how would you perhaps want to stimulate that this is a sector that should be supported by the next generation?
Yeah, I'm very happy to say that Commissioner with responsibility for Agriculture, Commissioner Hansen, in his draft CAP report, has committed and wants agreement in relation to an increased provision for what we call generational renewal payments to younger farmers, incentives to younger farmers. At present, the spend within the existing cap on young farmers is 3%. He wants to see that at least doubled. I know in my own country we've committed to 8%. A report within the Agriculture Committee seeks 10%. Look, we have to be realistic. If we got 6%, we'd be quite happy to see that. But I would also say and argue that it has to be complemented by an exit package for those vacating the farms, as a pension scheme, for example. And it should be mandatory on those countries to not have one without the other. I'm also conscious, as I said earlier, of the buy-in that there is from a younger, newer generations in relation to innovation and technologies and new work practices. And the advancements in those regards means that a lot of food production can be done in a much more timely fashion, leaving more spare time for them to enjoy their families and their localities. And I think they can and will play an active part in the future of agriculture. And we want to ensure that we have a leading role in that being the case by virtue of the next Common Agricultural Policy.
Well, since you are here today and Ireland assumed the EU presidency, could you speak a bit about what your hopes are for the direction that Ireland wants to set or is setting for Europe?
Okay, look, it's a great privilege for any nation to take on board the presidency, and we're no different in that. And we've done it on several occasions, 14 years ago, to be precise.
It's
But
a
look,
privilege, but it's
yeah,
also not every day.
yeah, look, some in our own country would like to think that we can bring a wish list with us.
Yes.
But we're an honest broker. We have a duty and a responsibility to act as non-partisan, to help and assist in the delivery of files, to help and assist in the delivery of policy and initiatives. And our first obligation will be to agree a budget, which is no mean feat, but one I'm confident we can steer to a conclusion. Will then create the envelope we spoke about in relation to delivery of a common agricultural policy. But aside from that, its theme will be around competitiveness, defence and security, and the vital role that's coming from a military neutral country, but one which recognises the need for us to be united in our efforts to help and assist Ukraine defeat the illegal invasion from Russia, because it's essential that is won. So there's no knock-on threat to any of the other Eastern Bloc countries who are far more interested in tanks than tractors, to be honest with you. But we will ensure to play our part in that. We're talking about values. I mentioned it earlier: rule of law, upholding democracy, making sure that is paramount in our dealings with external nations and so forth. And the other issue is online safety and security, especially for our youth and the children. And there's a great wish and a want on the part of many members, including myself, from my own country and others. We're very conscious of the invasive and dangerous tone and nature of much of the whole online activities. We want to play our part in trying to arrest those fears and to embrace technology and ensure technology plays a leading role in society.
Well, thank you so much, Barry, for being here and also setting the scene for what's about to happen next week.
Thanks very much indeed. Thank you.
And thank you to our viewers, and see us next time.